Aquarian Music Witch, the podcast.
Cool. Well, thank you for hopping on, EC. And so you're a Slavic folk magic practitioner and
Yes.
also a songwriter who has studied opera. And I'm familiar
Hmm.
with that kind of musical background, but I am less familiar with Slavic folk magic in particular. And I'm sure most listeners are in the same boat.
Sure.
So maybe can we start with can you share a little bit about Slavic folk magic and what drew you to that over other practices? Is it an ancestral connection? Or what is that?
Yeah, actually, so I kind of started out just as more of like an eclectic practitioner, sort of exploring different paths. I noticed just that I didn't really deeply connect with a lot of the common pantheons like Greek and Roman. I did a little bit of digging into my family history, and my dad's side of the family came from Poland, and I am fortunate and privileged enough to have very detailed family records on both sides. So I was able to trace back to where my dad's, I believe, grandfather, great grandfather came from, which is a village called Poznan in Poland. So like have the location of like my family's graves and everything, which is yeah, very, very, very lucky. And not everybody has that privilege. So I'm definitely aware of how fortunate I am. But yeah, so I just started exploring um, Slavic folk religion and going back, to like pre-Christian, like Eastern Europe, and just found some really, really interesting stuff. And of course, as with, um, every part of Europe that's been, colonized by Christianity, there's a point at which the like folk magic and the pagan deities that they worshipped kind of merged with Christianity. So yeah, it really did originate as an ancestral practice and a way for me to sort of use my lineage to inform my practice.
Yeah. Did you start from a place of Christianity? Is that how you grew up, or was it a non-religious background?
Yeah, so I was raised Catholic. My dad is a cradle Catholic, as are his parents. My mom converted when they married. So I was raised in the Catholic Church. Um, and I always say a great way to make sure that your children are not Catholic is to raise them Catholic. So so after going to Catholic elementary school, and especially like, being a young queer person in the church, it's not a super
Yeah.
welcoming environment. So when I went to college, I abandoned it completely until I started working at an Episcopal church, found a little bit, more welcoming of a community there, but it felt like it wasn't really my faith, it was my family's faith.
Mhm.
And going into like my ancestors' folk religion is, I think, where I found a much more deep and meaningful connection to spirituality.
Good. Is there a pantheon for the Slavic folk tradition?
There is. So the main Slavic pantheon comes from records that go back to Ukraine. So it really depends who you ask, because Slavic practice is very familial. And depending on what part of Europe you're in, you'll probably encounter like different deities that are worshipped in those communities. But there are several that are recognized across. So like Perun is the god of storms. That is like the representative of like the sky. Veles is his counterpart, which represents like the earth and the underworld. And then Mokosh is the only recognized, I believe, well, I don't know if that's so much true anymore, but she was one of the only female deities that was worshipped across Slavic folk religion. Otherwise, it's kind of regional. Um, but yeah, there is a pretty broad pantheon of Slavic gods and goddesses and spirits.
Do you work with any of them in particular?
Um, so that's a good question. I don't know if I would say I work with any of them. I do definitely honor and like have dedications to them, but I think unlike what I've heard from people who work with Greek and Roman and Nordic deities, Slavic deities are a little bit more standoffish. they respond when they want to respond. They're very particular. So I do have like a little Mokosh altar and a parent altar, which I didn't start out with. I sort of started out with just Mokosh because I love a mother goddess. Felt very connected to her. And then I called upon parents' protection when I was living in Louisiana during a hurricane.
Oh, okay.
And after I did that devotion, our power was the only power that stayed on in the entire neighborhood that we were in, almost all across Baton Rouge. So
What hurricane was that? Katrina?
that was Hurricane Ida, so just a couple
Okay.
years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that was in 2021, I think. And at that point I was like, well, I might as well set up an altar because if that's not a sign, I don't know what is.
Good. Well, I'm glad you were protected.
Mhm.
Are there any closed practices in Slavic folk tradition
So
you know of?
as far as practices that you need to be initiated into, I'm not aware of any in particular. But as I said before, everything's pretty familial. So it's not necessarily that you can't follow certain practices. It's just that there's things that you won't have access to if your family never did them.
That makes sense.
So
And
yeah.
some of your ancestors, and you said you sort of know where their graves are.
Mhm.
Do you know if they practiced similar folk traditions or if they had relationships to like regional deities that you know of?
So as far back as I can trace it, I don't believe so. Poland has been Christian for a very, very long time. So it's hard to trace in the records as far back as it would take to see like where paganism and Christianity would have intertwined. So as far back as I know, like my family on that side was pretty Catholic, pretty Christian. But even so, you can definitely see instances where that dedication to the earth and that connection with nature is still evident throughout.
Okay, that makes sense. Do you think that there are ways that your maybe gender identity or queerness kind of influences your approach to magic or your practice?
Um, yes, I mean, it definitely informs the way I practice because it's a huge part of who I am. It's really
Yeah.
hard to separate that from things that are so central to my identity and what I do day to day. Um, it is a little bit difficult at points, I think, to reckon with queerness in the context of Eastern Europe because it is so heavily Christian.
Yeah.
Like I can light a candle to my ancestors all I want, but like at the end of the day, I have no idea like how they in reality would respond when they were alive to like queer children or people who are trans and gay and bisexual in their household. So I just kind of have to rely on like my own personal notions that that like I'm my grandparents and my great grandparents' child, and I carry on that lineage in my own way. And even if there wasn't necessarily a positive outlook toward queer people historically in my family, which I have no idea whether or not that's the case, I can still be the point at which that changes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, it's obviously something to think about a lot. Like, if our ancestors are hateful people, and how do you kind of grapple with that as you're even working with them, maybe. But I heard, and I wish I could remember the source of the take, but I heard this great take, I think it was on TikTok recently, about how people, when they pass through, I don't know if I don't know about high vibration, low vibration talk, but like
Right.
they're in kind of a different vibration of themselves. And it's a place where they're able to kind of move beyond that like bodily like and everything that kind of weighs you down in the body. And I heard this person talking about how that includes them like you kind of come to terms with everything that happened when you were on earth, and part of that would be, I don't know, unpacking the racism part. But I like that idea that kind of like there's that human version of your ancestors that you have to kind of deal with and account for, and then maybe there's their presence as something that's like beyond that, where they're able to lift past that and maybe see that that wouldn't have been, I don't know. you know, when
Yeah,
you're in.
I think I completely agree with that, honestly. And of course, like being raised in a Christian church, you really have to work hard to deconstruct this notion of like heaven and hell after you die,
Yeah.
which is so, so difficult to do. And like even now, there's parts of that construction of the afterlife that I think still permeate like the way I walk through the world and everything. But I think that you really do have to just kind of sit back and be like, okay, you know, whatever spiritual form we take after we die, if there is any, it it just doesn't exist in the same realm as our like patterns of thinking and our patterns of behavior. It's totally different.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it than I was stumbling around it, but I think that's right. Cool. Can you share maybe also about your journey into the music field and what pushed you to study opera, and even like did following that path connect to some of your earlier spiritual and religious experiences as well?
Yeah, I honestly have been a musician ever since I was very, very little. I've always been a singer. My parents had me in piano lessons when I was little. Unfortunately, I never quite clicked with that. Still takes a lot of practice to, you know, have passable
Good for all
piano
of us,
chops
I
for me,
think.
but
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so I wanted to be a singer-songwriter for a very, very long time. And I went to an art school actually for middle and high school. So I was able to get some really good education and exposure to all the different types of things you can do as a musician. Um, and I was in a coaching with somebody that they had brought in who was head of an opera program at a school in Iowa. And so he was just kind of going through and like hearing people sing and, you know, like trying to recruit people to the program essentially. And I sang one of the arias that I was working on, and he said, "Are you applying for opera programs?" And I said, "Well, no, not really. Like, I want to do contemporary music and songwriting." And
Mhm.
he said, "I would really encourage you to rethink that." And uh,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, opera people are a different breed. Like, they
Yeah.
want everybody to be a classical musician.
Yeah, fair.
So I ended up, I did apply mostly to contemporary music and songwriting programs in like Tennessee, one in my home state in Colorado, some in like Boston, and then just on a whim, my mom is from Louisiana. My older sister was attending Louisiana State University at the time, so I said, you know, I might as well apply there and audition.
Mhm.
So I went in. It was the only classical music program I auditioned for, and I walked in and I sang for like the panel of teachers and faculty that were in there, and the director of choral activities walked me out after my audition, and he looked at me and he said, "We will do whatever it takes for you to come to school here."
That's great.
So so yeah, it's you know, like that ego boost along with, you know, like scholarship money that they threw at me.
Good. Good for
Kind of
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that definitely I think changed my path a little bit. I do still consider like songwriting and that style of music to be my first love. But I am grateful that I got the classical music training and that background in musical theory and technique, because I think that translates to contemporary music a lot more easily than contemporary music translates to classical if I had wanted to go in that direction.
That's a good point. And then do you use like I guess what kind of music do you surround yourself with now? And does it come into your practice very much? Do you touch on some of that Slavic stuff, or do you use music in general just vibrationally for your practice?
A little bit of both, to be honest. I I definitely try to call upon like, you know, spirits and like ancestors that surround me to you know, like inform my music and to not only have success and like find people who want to listen, but also to you know, to have that happiness that comes from it and that like sense of fulfillment. um I my practice is a little bit different because like I definitely don't follow Slavic folk traditions to a T. As I said, like my family in recent history is Christian, so like my practice is based on my own research, based on where my family came from. Um, and at the same time, I kind of just have elements that I have invented, I guess. Or I don't know, maybe other people do them, but I have no idea. So like for example, like energy cleansing before doing any sort of practice. Every so often I'll use like mountain sage or like rosemary, and like pine needles are also really common in Slavic practice.
Oh,
But I have a cat, so I don't like to use smoke very often. So like instead, what I've ended up doing is using tuning my guitar as a method
that's
of
smart.
cleansing the
Yeah.
energy around me, because like when you think about how it's all theoretically like based in like vibrations,
Yeah,
just like using those vibrations to kind of like reset and ground and cleanse.
absolutely.
And so I'll just visualize as I'm like tuning the string, just everything being like brought into harmony with each other, like as it sort of reaches that pitch.
Absolutely. I use like bells a lot, but same
Mhm.
idea. Just like those really bright, clear pitches will totally clear weird energy out of a corner the same way that smoke cleansing will. Yeah. I
Mhm.
love that you do that too, because I do that too. Um,
Yeah. And my roommate, who I love dearly, is Mexican. She's from Texas, and her parents are Mexican. So she smoke cleanses with Palo Santo, which obviously like I, like as a practitioner who is white and has European ancestry, like I that's a practice that I don't have access to. But it's nice that she does it, because now I'm like, oh, I get to take advantage of this energy
yeah.
cleansing without cultural appropriation.
For
So
sharing the space. I do love that.
mhm.
Do you know much about, like, have you dove into Slavic music much, or
A little bit, yeah. It's so Slavic tradition is a lot based on like oral and like oral
Mhm.
storytelling. So a lot of Slavic music that is like traditional folk music isn't really recorded as much.
Mhm.
Um but I have actually come across some Polish folk musicians that I definitely take inspiration from. And I really enjoy what they do. There's a band, I can't remember the name of them right now, but there was a Polish carol for the winter solstice that they kind of like rearranged the lyrics to be like explicitly pagan and address like the like winter spirits. Um, so it's nice to know that that's out there as well.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a source of inspiration for me. I've experimented a little bit. I'm in choir as well, so um, I have done a little bit of choral arranging, and I'm in actually a pagan choir in my city,
Cool.
and
Yeah.
they explore like all sorts of different music. A lot of it's Nordic. I think our director follows more of like a Nordic kind of path. And there's a lot of that music out there, a lot of stuff that mentions like Odin, and plenty of stuff mentioning like Greek deities and spirits, not as much Slavic. Um, so I've sourced a little bit of poetry from like several living poets that I've collaborated with, and that's my goal, is to get this choir singing some Slavic
I
pagan
love
music.
that. Would you write it yourself? Do you write music?
I do write music, yeah. So that's been my goal. I have like a couple works in progress that just need to be finished, but
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. I love that you're part of a choir, because I was going to also ask just about community, and I don't know if you have like specifically community around Slavic folk magic, but I love a pagan choir as an idea. And I was even talking to another guest about just like the power of singing in a choir, and
Hmm.
how when you move away from the church, that's like maybe less accessible, but it's just as needed. Like I would love to join a choir at some point. How did you find that group and kind of get involved in it?
So interestingly enough, a friend of mine, like my best friend in middle school, used to sing with them, and
Oh,
this was over 10 years ago. So long time ago. I moved to Louisiana, and at the time, like I had a close friend who was very active in the choral community, who like did all sorts of like small ensembles and community choirs and things like that. And since I knew that this choir existed in Denver, I said, hey, like what if we do like a little quartet or octet performance with specifically like secular or pagan music?
yeah.
So we did one little performance that was kind of based on that concept. And I
Okay.
actually reached out to the director here for ideas for like programming and music that we could sing. And then when I moved back to Colorado, that was like one of the first things I did was look them up and schedule an audition. So yeah, and my parents, who are still very Catholic, were not thrilled when they found out I was singing with a pagan choir. My dad came to one of the performances, which I feel badly that this was the first performance of ours that he came to, because it was definitely a whole lot more ritualistic than what we normally do. It was for a concert called Rite of Remembrance, which takes place in October to honor the dead. So we all come out with like candles and like cloaks, and have like little altars set up to remember like our loved ones who have passed and everything. So, and it's a really, really beautiful concert, but I can understand how it's a little bit jarring if you're not used to that. So I called my mom, who was out of town, and she was like, I didn't know it was a pagan choir.
Oh no.
And and I was like, yep, it is. And it's wonderful and I love it. So
That sounds
yeah.
really beautiful. What's like, what kind of venues or what kind of like places do you perform?
So we perform in like local Unitarian churches. There's one that's like a Unitarian Universalist church where most of our performances are, and then one that we rehearse in. So they've been, very kind to let us use their space and do our thing.
Yeah. And how big is the choir?
It's gotten pretty big. I would say we have like 30 plus members now.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That must be a great sound. Do you like submit to competitions or anything, or is it just purely for fun?
Not really. It's mostly for fun, and everybody has like their day jobs and things like that. So, they try not to make it too much of a time and energy commitment for people. But it is just one of my absolute favorite things about having moved back to Colorado is being able to participate in that choir and sing with that choir. I think it offers such a unique space for this community to come together, and have made some really wonderful friends and met some awesome people through that.
Good. That's so great to hear. Also, because I don't know what your experience is like since moving to Colorado. My impression, well, I wouldn't even say my impression, like having poked a little bit into the kind of spiritual communities in Colorado, one thing I noticed was that there was I think even like a school of some kind for this, but kind of for churning out almost like life coaches, like white lady shamans, like the shaman kind
Interesting.
of school. So I'm
I
curious, yeah, like I'm curious if you've run into that or what's your impression, or if it's really just been like positive
Yeah,
experiences.
I am not familiar with such a thing. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that because yeah, I'm not familiar. I will say that we do have quite a few of those little like metaphysical shops here, where you will very often run into people who will do like tarot readings or palm readings
Yeah.
and things like that. We have a cafe as well that's a music venue sort of in the downtown Denver area, and they also like regularly have a tarot reader just on staff. Um, so yeah, like there's definitely like you find a lot of that sort of style, I guess, of spirituality throughout the state. Um, but I can at least say on the part of our choir, which if any listeners are from Colorado, it's called Orpheus Pagan Chamber Choir. Absolutely wonderful community. And Orpheus specifically is definitely committed to, deconstructing like the racism and like the bigotry that is often permeated in spiritual spaces. So I'm very grateful for that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I did visit Denver last year for the first time and only time so far, but I would love to go back because it was really beautiful. The mountains seem like
Oh
there's
yeah.
a lot of opportunities to kind of get out and away for, just to experience those. And but I stayed at a hostel and I remember one of the like they had like a sign-in kind of desk area, and then next to it was you were supposed to list your spirit animal.
Oh,
No.
that's interesting.
It was a fun hostel otherwise.
Oh my
But anyway,
goodness.
I'm glad that you've been able to connect to some people that are like thinking about those things and deconstructing there too. And I'm sure that's kind of true everywhere, like in every state. I'm sure there's kind of grifty people and then there's people that are really seekers. It must have been interesting in you didn't live in New Orleans, you lived in Louisiana
I
though.
was in yeah, I was in Baton Rouge. I did travel to New Orleans every so often, but yeah, I was mainly based out of Baton Rouge.
Yeah. There's a lot of history there, so I'm sure the feeling of that place is very different from Denver.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think that Louisiana has like a bad reputation because it's such a red state. And of course, that is so deeply due to voter suppression and the fact that it is so difficult for people to participate in local politics there. Like the infrastructure is just not great. So it's just a self-perpetuating vicious cycle.
Hmm.
Um, but the community there is absolutely wonderful. So many, like it has such a rich queer community as well. Like I feel like I don't know, like I feel like I met more queer people in Baton Rouge than I have in Colorado. So but yeah, it's like the people there are absolutely wonderful. And it's just I think such a shame that like the political system there is so messed up.
That is a shame. I also, coincidentally, I took two major trips last year and they were to New Orleans and to Denver,
Oh my goodness, how
weirdly
about
enough.
that?
Um, so the other trip I went was there, and that was also for the first time. And it was, or no, I guess it was slightly more than a year ago. But anyway, most recent trips. And I got us, and I hail from Philly. That's where I am recording this from. And I had a sense that like New Orleans and Philly had similar vibe in a way. Like there was a lot of it felt like people were in a lot of pain there where I was
Hmm.
at least, but also that there's such like deep, rich history and such I don't know if I want to say magic or like there's just something that's very deep and very real, real and maybe even gritty about that place that reminds me so
Yeah.
much of Philly. It's just like a real place full of people that are going through real shit.
Yeah.
And I
And
love it there.
it's so yeah, it's difficult because even now in New Orleans and throughout Louisiana, you have people who still have not recovered from Hurricane
Yeah.
Katrina, who lost everything and still haven't rebuilt their lives.
And then the
Um,
pandemic, which I'm sure
and
just
oh
doubled
man,
everything.
the
Yeah.
pandemic, we had two hurricanes that hit Louisiana dead on during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but that was a major project that my partner at the time and I did when we were in Louisiana right after Hurricane Laura, which hit Lake Charles, which is like the western neighbor of Baton Rouge. One of our dedicated choir projects was doing like local community choirs where like we'd stand outside like social distance but like still all be singing together, and live streamed and recorded them to raise funds for the Lake Charles community to help recover from the hurricane.
That's beautiful.
um, yeah, so I think that's always something that's really powerful is using music for mutual aid and for community development. Um, is like that's just been, I think, a constant in my life that I really value.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think music is incredibly political and usable for those kinds of ends. That's really
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
Plus just vibrationally, like politically, but also I think it really does heal you in the body just to hear.
Hmm.
That's cool.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think what it comes down to, what I've realized through my practice is that it's mindfulness just plays a huge role because you can wave a stick of sage around all you want, but if you don't have that like presence of mind, it's you're not really getting anywhere with it. Um so maintaining mindfulness when I'm practicing, whether it's magic or music, is always the biggest thing for me. And if I'm, going on to perform somewhere when I'm doing vocal warm-ups, I'll even use that as a method of like cleansing and grounding. And I've definitely found that I have much more successful, confident performances when I warm up and like my head's in it.
Yeah, I love that idea of presence. I think also just like with listening, that's something that it requires presence and
Hmm.
yeah, I think people undervalue listening in general so much, like just in the world, like we should listen to each other more. But then when you engage in listening musically, I think that I don't know, like it activates parts of your brain that really allow you to just be there in the moment. And that is we all need to do more of that. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I
Um,
definitely agree with that as well.
Aquarian Music Witch, the podcast, is made possible by listeners like you. To support this project, you can contribute directly through our Ko-fi page at ko-fi.com/aquarianmusicwitch, or consider subscribing to our Supercast page. With the AMW Supercast Content Access Pass, you'll gain access to a vault of exclusive content and other cosmic perks starting at just $5 a month. Now, back to the show.
So changing the topic a little bit, maybe your bio mentions also that you're studying law with aspirations of becoming a labor lawyer. Is that right?
Yes, that is true.
What are some of the biggest like problems that you see in labor law that you would like to help address or raise more awareness about?
So definitely, I think a big thing is this idea, which thankfully I think is going away a little bit, but this idea that like unions are obsolete. Um, I think that every place of employment could use a labor union. I have been active in my previous places of employment in some form of union organizing almost at all times. And I think just having that worker solidarity is so hugely important, especially with such a wealth disparity between like people who own these companies and the people who are working for them.
Yeah. Do you work with any particular groups on that kind of thing? Or do you like, have you ever participated in a strike or anything like that?
So at not my last job, but the one before, I was working with the United Food and Commercial Workers because it was a grocery retailer. So that was our sort of like umbrella union that sort of handles all like grocery and retail and things like that. So we would basically reach out to workers from across the company because we didn't have a union yet, but we were working on forming one. So we would chat on Zoom meetings with people who were organizers with UFCW and then like workers from the stores and just strategize, talk about like how we can get the word out, how we can get other people on board, and at the same time kind of tackle problems that we were facing in the workplace and learn how to have productive conversations with our supervisors in order to resolve a lot of the issues that we were facing.
Okay. That's
And
good.
yeah, and I think that that's a huge thing. I think that drove me to want to practice law is because it's it's first and foremost negotiation. They say that only like a very, very small percentage of cases actually go to trial. A lot of it's resolved in mediation. So having that mindset where you're looking to sit down and make the outcome work for everybody is hugely beneficial and fundamental to law.
Yeah. Yeah, my experience of union stuff has to do with grad school because I was in Temple's music department
Oh yeah.
at the time that we went on strike with our union for the grad student union, and Temple made history as the first, I believe, the first university to pull healthcare at one point as a punishment for going on strike.
Wow.
And I think they reinstated it. They did reinstate it. I'm not sure exactly how the negotiations went, but it was like this big deal because, it's very difficult to convince a bunch of people to go on strike and then to maintain it. And it was a very scary time for a lot of my friends. So it's really powerful work to just get that big of a group of people going in the same direction and with the same kind of goals.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so powerful. That's crazy. Wow. I
Yeah.
I know that grad students just tend to get so screwed when it comes to all the work that they put in and all the labor versus, how they're compensated. It's tough.
It's tough. I was proud to fight for that, but I was also really privileged and like in a position where it was easier for me to forego whatever I had to forego to be involved. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
especially like the younger students, I can see how that's a huge set because you're sacrificing your stipend, you're sacrificing your income and potentially like, relations with networking relations or whatever for this career that you want, and not everybody has any kind of savings to fall back on or whatever like
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that it also puts hourly workers as well into kind of a bind when it gets to that point, which
yeah, because you can't go do other labor either while you're striking. You're just like there.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's really important. Like, I mean,
It
that
is,
especially
absolutely.
was important once they kind of put the healthcare on the table, because we were talking about it. Like, if we lose this, then the entire country, universities are going to feel like that's acceptable. And it really has. And I think it's gotten to this point everywhere. We're in obviously some kind of horrific, whatever you want to call it, recession or whatever's going on
Hmm.
that makes it so that everybody's kind of pressed. But definitely I can speak to grad workers and the fact that we were just, I mean, totally taken advantage of over, especially the pandemic put some crunches on things that made it infeasible. And I think that's everywhere. And
Hmm.
I think unions are incredibly, incredibly important. Um, so I think it's really good to just educate about them and the importance of successful movements like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And strikes are usually, or at least, we try to make them a last resort. Like we don't want it to get down to that point that, workers have to physically withhold their labor in order to, get what they need. Um, but unfortunately, sometimes that's what it comes down to. And it is a hugely important tool and a very important tactic. That workers can use. Really like the bottom line behind unions is, well, they can't fire all of us. So, um, and that's why it's so fundamental, is because when you don't have that solidarity, it is that much easier for employers to kind of pick you off one by one. Um, Whereas if you know that you have the leverage to stand together, it's a lot harder. And it also is a lot more impactful because, when one person raises an issue, sometimes that can go ignored, but when everybody is raising the issue, you have to talk about it.
Absolutely. And I also just like bringing it back to music. I remember during that time, and obviously, you have like protest songs and chants that you do as you're walking around
Hmm.
on strike or whatever. And that was one of the times in my life where I really was just living that experience of how impactful music can be on a political level and how much it can bring people together toward these kind of goals and just keep you um I don't know, like give you the energy to keep going and keep you kind of motivated to be in it and to be in solidarity. And I don't know, I just think that's a really powerful tool.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that too. Um, I've seen a lot of instances where my colleagues and collaborators have used music for political purposes. Like when I was either a sophomore or a junior in undergrad, and one of our grad assistants put together a treble ensemble, um, singing songs written entirely by women composers, and the whole concert was a fundraiser for a domestic violence shelter in Baton Rouge. So those kind of like community aid projects are like I think one of the best sort of like on its face ways to use music for a political purpose. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's always been political. I kind of side eye people who say that they want to keep politics out of music, because I'm like, I feel like you're misunderstanding what music is at that
Yeah.
point.
I agree. What a conversation. What an important conversation. Because yeah, people, I mean, I'm sure you know about like absolute music and the idea that yeah, you can take politics out, but absolute music is the whitest, manliest music. Like
Right.
it's clearly political, you guys.
Hmm.
So that is a very interesting thing that like a lot of people in classical music world don't want it to be political. And it always has been. And I actually wonder, like I personally, I guess I have almost not a vendetta. It's not that angry, but it's like when I was in when I was doing my PhD program at Temple, I was in music studies, which is kind of like music theory, but broader. And
Hmm.
I was writing about for my dissertation this idea that if music theory specifically is going to keep being a discipline in academia, then it needs to reform in some really serious ways because it is very white and male and white supremacist in its foundational kind of core tenets, like the idea that you can take a song and objectively analyze it and put it into like a constructed kind of framework that you have defined and thereby kind of control it, like and say that I'm an authority on what this actually means and not and it's objective, so you can't question my authority on what the music means or whatever. And so that whole conversation was really like it kind of became the main thing I was focused on in my grad career. And ultimately, I am making a career switch and I'm stepping away because kind of my conclusion about that, and based on how my dissertation was treated and based on
Oh,
how the message was treated, but they're not ready to do that. And so I kind of wonder if it's going to be like a dying or dead discipline. I feel that it's dying. I feel that it's going to be subsumed into kind of a broader music studies kind of idea. Like we still should study music history. We still should study certain things about how to analyze or listen to music in a way that's like generative or healing, or like there's something, about listening to music. But the way that music theory approaches it, um, is white supremacist, and I think part of what goes into that approach or that framework is this idea that it's objective, and that no, it's not political. It's just objective fact that we're correct.
yeah.
Mozart just happens. All these German guys happen to be the genius guys. It happens to be that we don't need to ever listen to a single female composer because they weren't as good or whatever. Objectively,
Right.
like
Yeah, and we have it on the record as well that a lot of the female composers throughout history, because there were plenty of them, but they were actively being suppressed by, their brothers and husbands,
yeah,
and still managed to persist in a lot of ways. Like the fact that we have Fanny Mendelssohn's music that we can perform, despite the fact that, they tried so hard to keep her from doing that, is really, I think it's a testament to, how much marginalized composers have really, persisted. And I am very pleased to say, I honestly have no idea whether this is on purpose or not, but I do notice that for the last few programs that I've sung with Orpheus, usually about half or less than half of the composers are men. And another really wonderful thing is that so much of what we sing is also living composers. So, people who can still directly profit off of their work being sung,
that's cool.
Which is also, I think, a really important conversation to have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because music is very like the reality of music is that it is bodily. It is like connected to us. And then
Mhm.
what classical music does is like distills it and distances it from us. And one of the many things that does that is like selecting from only dead composers, and the classical music canon is, and they can't, like, you can't get added to the canon anymore because there's no more space because
Mhm.
everybody's already been added. So that leaves you in this weird place where they call it like museumification, but it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like distilled and separate and almost like we're in a museum looking at this piece or this work. And even the fact that it's like a piece of music instead of we're just musical creatures is like separate. And yeah,
Yeah.
I love that people are kind of trying to take steps to reverse those things by actively, thinking to choose a woman composer, or thinking to get somebody to write it who is alive today instead of picking something,
Yeah.
I think those things make
Absolutely.
sense.
Yeah, I'm really glad that these conversations are being had and that there's a push for kind of this more uh, progressiveness in musical spaces. It's so especially hard with academia just because it is so male and white dominated and has like such deeply ingrained white supremacist roots. You see a lot of that in the law field as well, which
I'm
I'm sure
sure.
does not come as a surprise. They
Yeah.
definitely are pushing for more progressiveness as well. I'm happy to say that all of the judges at the Colorado Court of Appeals have their pronouns like in their email signature. I attended an argument at the Court of Appeals last week, and before even starting, the judge that was presiding said, for anybody involved in this case, if we get your name or your pronouns wrong, let us know and we will correct that.
Yeah.
And that was really wonderful to hear. And, obviously there's parts of the legal field that are still very, very archaic, but I'm glad that there is a push to be more inclusive. Um, but at the same time, like we had a lot of like DEI like speeches and training during orientation, and there was a judge from the Colorado Supreme Court that gave us a speech, and she brought up that over half of all law students in the United States are women, but I think it was, I don't remember the exact number. It's like around a quarter or a third of lawyers at the top 30 law firms are women.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Well, I'm glad to hear though that there's like, maybe you can speak more to that, like what you see in law, because I'm aware of intersectionality as a legal concept. I'm not so aware of like what has happened in the, what has it been, 40 years or whatever since that
Hmm.
came about. And I know it's been very influential in culture, but do you see it kind of rippling into the way that like law is taking shape, or what are some of the things that you see that are still not that still need to be addressed maybe?
Um, oh man, like I could go on about the things that still need to be addressed, but yeah, I definitely think that there is a wave of support for like intersectionality in the legal field and to be more inclusive. Um, but one of the things that you really have to take into consideration is like what they call the objective standard as like a standard of review, which is, like would a reasonable person have behaved this way under the circumstances? But then it's like,
What's a reasonable person?
exactly. And we talk at length about that because like at a certain point, like yes, you can apply that standard pretty consistently, but then when you have these specific cases, especially in criminal law, it's, you're not dealing with a reasonable person, you're dealing with a domestic violence victim who, has endured all this trauma that has totally altered the way their brain perceives certain situations. Like it's not, you can't even say like, would a reasonable domestic violence victim do this, because like we've just kind of thrown that out the window at that point.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, what is
so
a reasonable domestic violence victim? Like, what is that
right.
even? I can't even conceptualize that person in my head.
Yeah, and like that's a lot of the cases in criminal law are definitely very difficult to read, difficult to tackle. I don't want to practice criminal law for that very reason. Just the stakes are very, very high, and I feel like it's pretty easy to get emotionally attached to your case. And I think that, at least for me, that would hinder my practice. So I'm sticking strictly with civil law. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's, we read cases about like domestic violence survivors, killing their abuser, being tried and convicted for it. What self-defense means, how do you determine whether or not something is self-defense? Is somebody who's survived years of domestic violence, killing their abuser in their sleep self-defense? Um, so all those kinds of questions that you address. And uh, so it's difficult. It's a very difficult analysis to perform. And I really feel for everybody involved on all sides of criminal law. It's just it's very heavy.
Yeah. What do you feel, or have you thought much about, like, so I'm thinking of like Angela Davis, who's very like against the prison system and anti like
Hmm.
carceral justice overall. Do you ever, what would you think about that hypothetically, like the idea of just moving completely away from carceral justice? Do you think that there's pitfalls to that, or do you think it would be ideal if it was
Yeah,
possible?
I mean, so I generally speaking, I consider myself a prison abolitionist as well. I love Angela Davis. I love reading her work, and like I definitely look up to her as an activist. Um, yeah, I mean, like obviously, I think there's pitfalls in any sort of structural change, but that doesn't mean that they don't need to take place. Um, and I definitely have a very hard time in all the criminal cases that I've read, seeing how incarceration as it currently stands is solving any of these problems. Um, I don't think it is in most cases. And sadly, one of the appeals cases that I watched last week in person was it involved a domestic violence survivor shooting and killing her abuser, and the um, the trial court convicted her of first degree murder. They appealed on a self defense theory, um, and I was watching and listening to the arguments, hearing the facts of the case, And I'm just thinking, even if this wasn't self-defense, which like to me, I don't have all the facts of the case. It seems like it was. Even if it wasn't self-defense, what is sending her to prison for life gonna solve? What's that gonna fix? You know, it's really difficult. And obviously I don't have all the answers as to prison reform or prison abolition. You know, I definitely trust the people who have dedicated their lives and done the research into it. So, you know, like obviously I default to them, but generally speaking, I am very much in favor of prison abolition.
Yeah, well, I am too, but I think it's interesting to hear from somebody who's like more where that's more part of your life and you're thinking about it. Yeah, great. So then I wonder, just maybe finishing up the hour here, what kind of projects or upcoming endeavors are you currently working on that listeners might be able to support, or even like any choir concerts coming up?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking. So we do have our spring concert for Orpheus coming up on May 11th. Um, you can follow Orpheus Pagan Chamber Choir on Instagram, see all of the information there. But this particular concert is surrounding the Wheel of the Year, celebrating the change of the seasons and everything. So some really wonderful pieces. As far as personal projects, I'm actually in the process of recording and releasing some new music that I have written myself.
Exciting. That's
Um,
great.
I
What's the
am
genre?
sorry.
What's the genre?
I would say like, you know, general like indie singer-songwriter.
Cool.
I play guitar and I play a little bit of piano. I do not play the drums. So I'm relying primarily on software drums, which presents a unique set of challenges. But I have, you know, a good enough microphone at home that I can record everything, and then the plan is to then hand it off to a professional at a studio to have it mixed and mastered and just ready for production. So yeah, I have two singles that I am planning on releasing this year. Followed up by an album of original music. This will be my very first album that I've ever released. And it surrounds themes of identity and of the name and my name as a like center point of identity. Um, I go by EC to most people, but my first name is Eva, and my friends and my family call me Eva. And sometimes if I feel as though I'm close enough with somebody that I can give them my name, that to me is an expression of intimacy in and of itself. So a lot of the songs that I've written for this particular album kind of revolve around that theme of, you know, giving your name to somebody as an expression of intimacy and sharing a central part of identity with them.
Yeah, well, that's really such a cool project. And so you're really working on all the earlier stages of that yourself. So I'm sure you're putting a lot of your personal energy into the songs.
Yeah, that's where most of my free time is going at the moment, which, you know, there's not a lot of it, but it definitely keeps me sane through law school.
Good. Yeah, how much longer do you have on law school?
So I'm finishing up my first year right now, so I assuming they don't kick me out, I'll have 2 years after this.
Okay.
Um,
Wow. Well, that's a lot on your plate, but all really powerful stuff. I'm really excited to check out the music, and I'll definitely be following that choir on you said they're on Instagram?
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, they are. I think I've been tagged in a couple of their posts, I believe. I'd have to double check what their actual handle is on Instagram.
I can link it in the description and stuff if you send me.
I would absolutely love that. Yeah, we definitely love the publicity. And you know, I'm all about just kind of getting the word out there that this choir exists. Just because it has been such a wonderful community to be a part of, and
Yeah.
so valuable. But yeah, like they're just straight up Orpheus Pagan Chamber Choir on Instagram.
Great. Well, I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for talking to me today.
Yeah,
Really been
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm glad we connected. We found each other on that 433 group, right?
Yes,
Yes.
that is correct.
I have loved that group for years. It's been like one of my favorite Facebook groups for years and years.
It's so fun. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
probably every person who's completely burned out of the music field is in that group. So I feel, and most of us are trans.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's really been a pleasure, EC. I hope you have a great
Thank
rest of
you.
your day. Thank
Yeah,
so much
you
again.
too. Yeah, thank you. All right. Bye.